Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. I am your host, as always, Jason Evans, and I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Klein, who's known on the DBR boards as Dev11. Sam, say hi.
Hi, everybody.
Perfect, Sam. Thank you so much. Hey, with no Duke games to talk about this week, you might think that it would make for a slow week for the podcast. Well, you would be wrong. Wait until you hear what we have next. I know all of you have been following, at least in some fashion, the terrible academic scandal involving UNC athletes. According to the Wainstein Report, the scandal started something like 18 years ago, involved something like 1,500 Tar Heel athletes who took classes that never met and often required no work. These athletes were often given grades of A's and B's and, A pluses for doing absolutely nothing as part of an effort to ensure that they stayed eligible and in some cases got degrees that they simply did not earn. Well, I will confidently say that we would not know anything or not know much about all this if it wasn't for the work of our next guest. Dan Kane joins us now. He is an investigative journalist for the News and Observer, and it is his reporting for the past couple of years that has been the driving force uncovering the wretched details of the massive athletic and academic scandal at UNC. And I'm thrilled to welcome Dan Kane to the DBR Podcast. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Can I start by asking you this? When Mary Willingham contacted you to begin spilling the beans about all this a few years ago, did you have any idea how big it would get?
At that time, 3.5 years ago, no. I mean, this all really kind of started out of the football team, and it started with two things. Michael McAdoo's paper that turned out to be heavily plagiarized. That was something that the NC State fans found, brought it to my attention. We wrote about it, and then a month later, when I had gotten a hold of the transcript of Marvin Austin, one of the football players was caught up in that sort of agent and too much tutor help scandal, maybe for lack of a better word. That transcript, showed other issues, particularly him getting a B+ in a summer class before he even takes remedial writing. And just do you know how this thing starts? I did that story. It ran in a Sunday paper in August, and Mary sent me an email, just telling me that she had worked there and that she had written a paper about college athletics. And when I confirmed that she had worked there, I wanted to talk to her. What was going on in that academic support program, and what was and when I was able to talk to her, I asked her about these strange things. This B+ grade, this this plagiarized paper. It's the same professor, same department, and she told me, well, what she did know was that these athletes were being put in these classes that didn't meet, and all they do is write a paper, and I was really perplexed by that. But at that time, it seemed to be all about football, and there was this belief that this was all part of the rise of the football program. They were, Butch Davis had come in, and all of this earlier trouble, seemed to stem with his tenure there, but something like this, you would have to wonder. I mean, were basketball players in this, and if so, to what extent? And as things kind of moved along and kind of, bit by bit, we learned that this thing went back a lot farther. It was known from the outset that there were a lot of AFAM majors in basketball, particularly in the first half of the last decade. So, there were those indications, but, it took some time to really kind of, show that a lot of this really did involve the basketball team. And, why it took so long, I don't know. I mean, some of it has to do with the university just making it difficult to get information about, how far this went back, what kind of communication was going on, between the academic support program and Debbie Crowder, Julius Nyangoro, not doing sort of like a evaluation of transcripts and what kind of classes athletes were taking and how much were they concentrating in these particular kinds of classes. It took quite a while for a lot of that to become known. So
can I ask? I was going to say, what's the single most surprising thing that you've uncovered in all this? Has there been any one moment where you saw maybe it was something you were reading in the Wainstein Report, or maybe it's something that you discovered some other way that you just went, wow, this is the thing I never thought I'd see.
Oh boy, there've been a few oh wow kind of moments. Marvin Austin's transcript was kind of up there, because you just couldn't explain how somebody would get a B+ in an upper level class, the summer before they start as a freshman, and then be taking the remedial writing class, and I think his GPA, according to that transcript, was somewhere in the neighborhood of like a 2.3. He just wasn't doing well in much of anything else. That was a surprising moment. When we got the records showing that the last no-show class was this FM 280 class that had nothing but football players in it. It was created almost overnight, within a couple of days of the start of that summer semester. That was another one. That was in, I think around June of 2012. You guys probably are aware of when Julius Pepper's transcript, got out there.
Yeah.
I found this transcript.
It was most incredible.
Yeah, it was it looked like it. I found this test transcript up on their website and Carolina's website, and I was asking the university, about it because it just had this eerie connection to the fraud scandal, and they insisted it wasn't a real transcript, and I said, look, I'm going to write about this. I'm going to put it in the paper. Please check. They wouldn't check the records, and as you guys probably know, the NC State fans had figured out, looking at the web address, how to trace it back to an actual copy of Julius Pepper's transcript, and that was pretty. That was a big wow moment right there, and it really shook things up, and it drew a lot of attention, to the scandal, and led to the second investigation into this, which was led by former Governor Martin, and which you all know, now obviously didn't quite go far enough.
That's an understatement.
So that's another. You guys are probably aware that yesterday I did a blog about a particular email that I found really interesting about exchange between Debbie Crowder and Wayne Walden, the basketball counselor. You can find that at our website. I think it's the top read item in our website today. But I annotated this email, because it shows more clearly than any other I can think of, when Debbie started feeling the heat about these classes, Debbie Crowder. It also shows that you had a tutor who approached her twice to try to put this particular basketball player who we don't know, his name is redacted, into one of these quote unquote independent study style type classes, and she's Debbie has kind of warded her off, but there's Wayne asking again, and she relents and she puts him in, and Wayne's email indicates that this is a student who struggled to read and write, and they are trying to get him out of one class that apparently he's struggling with, and getting him into one of these classes, So that was. I found that one to be I stopped and read that one a few times, when I was going through the stack of records that supplemental records that Ken Wainstein and his team provided when they released the report, back in October. I'm sure there's some others, but there are a number of them. Those are three.
Dan, I wanted to go back. You mentioned the NC State fans that kind of played a role in this whole thing. How much would you say, what kind of credit would you say is owed to the folks at Pack Pride in kind of moving this story along? And do you think it says anything about, the way that you perform investigative journalism in 2014 that anonymous internet posters had some kind of influence on this work?
Well, there's no doubt that they had influence on this case. They were the first ones to identify the plagiarism in Michael McAdoo's paper. They were the first to identify this transcript that I'd found as belonging to Julius Peppers. I think there've been a couple other occasions where, they have pointed to important, evidence. They are clearly a big part of the story, and the other thing that you have to realize today in this this world of social media, where there's so many ways for people to kind of get out there and say what they want to say or post what they want to post, is that you can find, as a reporter, you can find good leads there. The tricky part is that it's a big sea, and in some cases it almost feels like a sewer, quite honestly. I mean, some of the discourse and some of the stuff that gets thrown out there in some of these places it can get pretty ugly, and time consuming. So you have to figure out a way to, find the wheat amid the chaff, I guess. And so it's. But don't get me wrong. One of the bigger developments in this story was, we did a story in September of 2012 where we had gotten a hold of records involving a class. I think it was called AFRI 370, which was advertised as a senior seminar for African studies majors. Okay, people who were seniors or who had extensive expertise in African matters. That's what it was listed as in the course catalog. Well, we got a whole bunch of records showing that they were sticking academically challenged freshman football players in that class. Okay, well, one of the leads about that class actually came from one of these websites where students can get on and check out professors. In this case, I think it's called Koofers.com, and I was kind of searching around that, just to see what I might see there. And sure enough, there was a student who had filed a comment saying, I wish this class had met. I was told to just write a paper. This was in 2010. So long before anybody knew what was going on here. But so there are these. The whole social media phenomenon. There are all kinds of ways where you can, kind of get leads to, problems or big stories, I guess. But it can be difficult trying to, find them too, because there's just so many avenues out there.
Once again, folks, listening to the Duke Basketball Report podcast, we're talking to Dan Kane, the investigative journalist with the News and Observer, who's been really taking the lead for the past several years on the UNC academic athletics scandal. Dan, I want to ask about the Wainstein Report. You mentioned that you've been reading through all the supplemental material in it. Do you think there's a lot more sordid details that are going to be revealed? And there's some folks who say that the written report by Wainstein and his people didn't make things look as bad as these attachments, these emails and other documents indicate. What's your feeling about that?
Well, that's one of those things. I think people are going to have different opinions about the report and what the supplemental material says and all of that. I mean the report. First of all, it does something very important, which is confirm that this was an athletic scandal. For a long time, the university, held on to this, belief, I guess, that, it wasn't because there were, non-athletes in these classes and everybody got the, same grade and they all had equal access. Well, Ken Wainstein's report shows that, you read the beginnings of when this happened, and it starts with, counselors in the academic support program kind of bugging, Debbie to get, Dr. Nyangoro to lighten up on these independent studies. And it kind of progresses from there. The numbers of athletes, how they were getting in versus, non-athletes. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that report shows that this was pretty much an athletic-driven scandal. Probably would not have happened if it weren't for this pressure to keep athletes eligible. So that's very important, and it's very detailed in that too. In the report, number of very interesting examples. Everyone's talked about the slideshow presentation, where they're freaking out because Debbie's retiring, So I think where people do raise questions, it has to do with there's a finding in there that I think that they believe that the university wasn't trying to cover this up, and it took an awful long time to get a lot of this stuff out, and so you've seen some folks disagree with that, and then I think the other thing that people kind of talk about is the basketball program and what Roy knew and what he's telling Roy Williams, Coach Roy Williams, what he's telling Ken Wainstein now versus what he was saying publicly, as this scandal was becoming kind of, I don't know, trickling is not the right word, but kind of sort of bubbling out, So, there's a couple of places where, you hear people kind of feel like maybe there was more work to be done, but it's a pretty substantial report, and it tells us a lot more than, what we had known previously.
When looking at that report, I think that there was some reference to the Wainstein report really just covered the African American Studies department. Do you think that there's more investigation that you or something like a Wainstein Commission could do about other academic departments that might reveal sort of similar results?
Well, one thing that is mentioned in the report, is there are a number of quote unquote easy classes that are identified. And in fact, that spreadsheet, or PowerPoint that everyone talks about, there's one of the pages in there. They're talking about some of these other easy classes that are also I don't know if they've used the word on fire or maybe coming to an end. There's a fear about those classes too, and I think Ken Wainstein and his team have do not view those as these along the lines of these no-show classes, but they do confirm that some of these classes were go-to classes because they're believed to be easy. And one of the things that I'm not sure where the university is with all this, but I would assume that some folks there are looking at these classes and trying to determine do they have the proper rigor. There's always this debate about easy classes and when are they legitimate and when are they not, and I don't know if we've answered that with these quote unquote easy classes that the report mentions. And then you also have this situation with Jan Boxell and her philosophy classes that she was making available. Again, she was a professor, so therefore, they are different from the AFAM classes in that they did have an instructor, but how much instruction, was the grading appropriate? Those seem to be questions that need to be asked with her classes. So those are some areas where there could be some additional investigation or inquiry.
So you don't know when you might be done with working on all this.
Well, we've got. There's obviously the story is still going. You've got the Accreditation Commission is back. The NCAA is back. There's a lot. There is some interest in Congress about what happened here and how it's being dealt with. There are there's just other things going on here that are going to obviously result in more stories, more information, potentially surfacing.
So, taking it in a little bit of a different direction, we were kind of curious. You've been working in the Triangle for a while. Are you a college sports fan? Were you before this? And sort of how do you feel about college athletics since you've been covering this story?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've been a college sports fan. I've watched my share of college football and basketball and baseball and hockey and maybe a few others, maybe even a little bit of golf for all I know. One of the most thrilling games I ever watched was Villanova and Georgetown in what was that, 85?
85.
That sound right?
Memory, yep.
As far as how has this whole thing affected my watching college sports? What I'll say is professionally, I've kind of made a decision that I just wasn't going to go to any games, at any university around here. I'm trying very hard to, show that, I'm not aligned with any particular program here. I've got to cover something that's pretty ugly. A lot of fans, not been happy with these stories at Carolina, and on the other side, a number of fans at Duke, at NC State have been very happy with these stories, and so that's put me, it kind of put me in the position of realizing that just kind of take a break from all the college sports watching, and until I feel like this is this has run its course. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's an interesting perspective on it. Thanks.
And somewhat related to that, we've heard the reports about angry emails and threats that you've gotten. You obviously live and work in an area where many people cherish UNC athletics. How, aside from not going to games that you just mentioned, how has your reporting affected your life outside of the office? Has it affected your life outside the office?
Well, it has, in the sense that this story is, gotten so much attention that, everybody asks about it. Everybody asks about it. College sports is hugely, huge interest to so many people, and this is just a really fascinating case, and they all wonder, what's going to happen next and all of that. So, it's affected me from that standpoint. Obviously some of the, nasty stuff, you kind of have to, keep in the back of your mind that, there are people out there that, don't really like what you're doing, and I don't go around advertising, that this is what I've been doing for the last 3 years, so, I don't know, that's kind of the gist of it, but I haven't I don't have it's not like I've hired a guard or something and put it in front of my house or something like that, or,
and we're glad that that doesn't have to be the case.
No, so a lot of that stuff. I think it's. I don't know. It's. I know. I'm sure some of it's intimidation, and maybe some of these guys also think that's being part of the team. But one thing I want to point out here is that, there are a lot of people out there who are Carolina fans who have been very supportive of this reporting too. support Carolina fans in terms of fans of the entire university, and particularly its academic mission. Those folks realize that really the first role of UNC is to educate students and educate them well. Athletics are obviously have their role there at the university, but number one is the integrity of the academic experience, and so I've heard from a lot of those folks, and that's I think that's something that university alumni should be proud of. I mean, I've learned very early on that there are a lot of people there, alums, faculty, student staff, who really care about that university's role as an academic leader, nationally. So, but there's some folks who are big time sports fans, and clear to me that they don't want to see anything bad happen to their sports team. So
it's that divide is interesting, but I want to come back to Roy Williams. We had talked about him earlier, kind of looking at Roy and looking at maybe some of the other leadership like Butch Davis or Mac Brown going back farther. How much do you think that those head coaches or the athletic directors who have been at UNC during this time, how much do you think that they knew about these classes and what was going on, and sort of what kind of role do you think they played in it? Because I think we've gotten some conflicting stories from Roy about, he knows what the kids are taking or he doesn't know what the kids are taking. Sort of what's your take on that?
Well, you have to look at what's out there. Ken Wainstein, in his investigation, they determined that he did not know that these classes lacked instruction, but he was aware that there were, a very high number of AFM majors, and that there was a unusual amount of independent study use out of that department as well. And where it gets murky is what exactly did he do with that knowledge? I think the report indicates that he went to Joe Holliday, and maybe that Joe went to Wayne Walden. It's just it's unclear, how things flowed from there. And and the thing I've spoken about this before, and I think I mentioned it earlier, is just there's this question I have about Roy acknowledging this stuff to Ken Wainstein in his report, but being asked in the 2 years prior to that specifically about these classes, specifically about the fact that basketball players were no longer in them when Debbie Crowder retired, and his responses there just they don't, they give you the impression that there wasn't any effort on his part to deal with this situation. And it just begs the question, why not tell us then what you've told Ken Wainstein now? And but I can only really refer to what's out there, what's in the Wainstein report, what's in various correspondence, what Roy has said publicly, what others connected with the basketball team have said publicly. It's hard for me. I don't want to sit here and speculate about what that all means. I really need to just deal with the facts and what is known out there, and we may find out more as some of these other investigations continue.
Well, Dan, first of all, I want to thank you so much for spending the time you have with us, and I want to close with, unfortunately, a piece of speculation. Based on what we know, based on what you've uncovered, what the Wainstein Report has uncovered, if you were the NCAA, what kind of penalties would you think North Carolina deserves?
That is the question that I absolutely just refuse to answer. Okay, I mean, I'm not. Look, I'm not. I don't work for the NCAA. I've never, handled an infractions case. I haven't even really covered, infractions cases before. So I'm not the guy who can tell you like, well, because there's this and this and this and this, it means that and that and that and that. I mean, there are other folks out there, who have a lot more expertise in that than me. And the other thing is it is hard to figure out how the NCAA works. I mean, there's been a lot said about how they'll act a certain way with some universities, and it doesn't seem to be consistent with others. I mean, that's been a complaint. You guys have probably talked about it. So it's just, I can't tell you how this is going to play out. I don't even want to speculate. I don't even make a guess.
Yeah, and that's fine, and I figured that's what your answer would be, but I was going to ask it anyway.
You are not the first.
I could tell from your answer that I wasn't the first one to bring that one up with you. Mm-hmm. Listen, Dan Kane, investigative journalist with the News and Observer. Again, we're so thankful. Really appreciate you joining us this week. Really appreciate the hard work that you have done to uncover what some say is certainly the biggest academic scandal in collegiate sports history. Thanks again for joining us on the Duke Basketball Report podcast.
Yep, thank you, Dan. Really appreciate it. And bye-bye. We can check out Dan's work at newsobserver.com. Is that right?
Yes, newsobserver.com, or buy the paper.
That's it.
So it still exists. Still exists in print form, huh?
Yes, it still exists. It's still the best way to read it.
Well, Sam, that was really great, wasn't it? We were really lucky to have Dan with us.
Yeah, I think that he provided a lot of insight, and likewise, I think it's great that he took time out to join us and sort of talk about this incredible story that he's been at the front of for 4 years now.
Yeah. I'll tell you, my favorite moment, unquestionably, was when he talked about being a sports fan who, not much of a sports fan, but someone who followed college sports who can't go to games anymore. He can't go to Duke games or NC State games for fear of looking like he's rooting for one of those teams over UNC, and he can't go to Carolina games for fear. I don't want to say for fear of his life, but for fear that something really bad might happen. Yeah. But to me, that was a great human moment, and I really appreciate Dan's sharing that with us.
Yeah, and it's interesting for someone in his position to kind of be put in the front of the story. I mean, his name is associated with this forever, and I imagine that journalists don't often find themselves in that kind of instance. So. Very cool, very interesting stuff.
Okay, well, enough of the conversation about UNC and the horrible, terrible things they did wrong. I want to move us back to Duke a little bit. How about that, Sam? Good idea?
Good. Yep, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and let's look forward to Duke's next major opponent coming up this week. We will be playing the UConn Huskies. Most years, this would be a incredibly touted and hyped matchup because we're talking about two of the traditional powers in college basketball over the past 20, 30 years. And Duke and UConn have certainly played more than a few memorable games, mostly in the NCAA tournament. But Sam, I know you took a look at UConn there. By the way, we're recording this on Saturday, December 13th. UConn has a game on Sunday. We don't know how they'll do against Coppin State because we don't have crystal balls to know the result of that game. So I'm just going to pretend like the UConn that we're going to play coming up in just a few days is the UConn that is currently 3-3, which is not an impressive record. Sam, I know you looked at them play Yale a little bit. What'd you think?
I should also note that we have a game, I believe, against Elon before that UConn game. So I am not going to assume anything about the Elon game. Just to note that obviously UConn is sort of a bigger name opponent, so that's who we chose to focus on this week. That being said. So obviously UConn won the national championship last year, but they lost a lot of guys off that team. despite that, and mainly because they were bringing back their point guard, senior Ryan Boatwright, they started the preseason ranked either 17th or 15th, depending on which poll you looked at. They did okay in the tournament down in Puerto Rico, although they lost to West Virginia. And then since then, they've lost consecutive games against Texas and Yale, both at home, both on three-pointer buzzer beaters. So UConn is now 3-3. We kind of say this about lots of teams, two shots go a different way, and they're looking at 5-1 and probably still ranked, and the hype is going to be a lot greater. But that's not where they are. They're 3-3. They have a loss against an Ivy League team at home. There was a great quote from the Yale coach. His name is James Jones. After the game, he told the reporters, he said, "I told the guys in the locker room, no matter how old they get, if they get Alzheimer's or dementia, they'll remember this for the rest of their lives," which I thought was a nice quote.
I love that. I love that. It's, that's a coach understanding what his team's potential fate will be over the rest of the season and how important this one game was. So that's pretty cool.
And that's not to denigrate Yale. They are predicted to be good in the Ivy League, but good in the Ivy League should not be competitive with, top of the American. Although a lot of folks around the country think that the American has really dug itself a big hole so far this year and might only get one bid. So UConn has to.
I'll tell you really quick before you get into more of UConn. There's an interesting thing about them and being in the American Conference, American Athletic Conference, whatever the heck that amalgamation of teams calls itself. Most people think of UConn. People who watch college sports say UConn is the big loser in the major conference realignment that's happened over the past several years. They are not playing in a major conference now by any stretch of the imagination. When they were in the old Big East, it really boosted their profile by being associated with that. And similarly, being in the AAC hurts their profile at this time. The regular season, they're not going to face the same kind of important teams. As a result, they have to do better because every loss is going to sting a bit more. It has nothing to do with the upcoming game, but UConn finds itself in a very, very different place than it was just a couple of years ago. And I know that school, they started football about a decade or so ago in an effort to raise the athletic program's profile. It did for a while, and now they're, UConn is clearly the biggest loser, in my opinion, in the conference shuffling that happened in recent years. It's unfortunate for them, and it does spill over to basketball, even though the conference shuffled mostly about football. Okay, sorry, total sidetrack there. Continue, sir.
Yeah, I'll add to that now UConn is really like the East Coast Gonzaga. They kind of play in a bad conference, but they're a really good team. They're still going to schedule aggressively. I think other schools are going to want to see them, in those Thanksgiving tournaments in exotic places. But this year they did themselves no favors by losing all the major games that they played in those tournaments. They lost to Texas, they lost to West Virginia, and then on top of it, they lost to this Yale team that is probably not going to the NCAA tournament and is certainly not getting an at-large bid. So they've dug themselves a hole, but they have a lot of talent and can come out of it. So I mentioned Ryan Boatwright. He's the senior point guard. He kind of does everything all over the floor. He's averaging 18 points a game, and he's averaging 5 rebounds and 4 assists. So he's most of that team's production. However, early in the season, he suffered an ankle injury against Yale. Like I said, I watched some of that game. He really didn't look like he was at his sharpest, and the offense is mostly based around Ryan Boatwright. So if he's still not healthy this week, and I haven't been able to figure out if he's going to be, but if he's not healthy this week, then they're really going to struggle. They've also got a very talented freshman forward named Daniel Hamilton. He's kind of like their Justice Winslow. He's 6'7", he's 190, he shoots 43% from 3. He kind of moves around the court really well. And then they've got a center who, against Yale at least, seemed like he had a few good post moves. His name is Amita Brima. He's 7 feet tall, 230. So he's going to be going up against Jalil Okafor. We'll see how his offensive game is affected by playing against, a real big man who's going to be able to defend him. Okafor, obviously, wasn't able to contain Frank Kaminsky on the perimeter against Wisconsin, but down low in the post, he was pretty good. So while Brima, I think, probably looks good against small teams, we'll see how he does against a big like Okafor. And then there are two other guys I wanted to note who are on this team who are interesting to us. One is Sam Cassell Jr., who's obviously the son of the former NBA alien. He was originally thinking about going to Maryland. He ended up going to junior college. Now he's in his first year as a sophomore at UConn. He's only shooting 31% from the field so far, but he's expected to get better. So they're looking for him to improve. And then also their first guard off the bench is our old friend Rodney Purvis from NC State. He transferred to UConn, I believe, after his freshman season. He's also suffering from an ankle sprain, so he's a little hobbled coming off the bench. But so UConn has talent. They just haven't really put it together yet, at least on the offensive end. On defense, they're smothering. Their guys are all really big, other than Boatwright, who is pretty athletic for 6 feet. All their starters are at least of really good NCAA level size. They got a 6-foot center. Their starting forwards are 6'7" and 6'9". They got a bunch of 6'4", 6'3" guards. So they won't get out-muscled by Duke, except maybe down low with Jolly Okafor against Amita Brima. So they play really good defense. They are great at rebounding. And they run about 7.5 players deep, kind of like we do. So they're just looking for their offense to improve. They haven't been shooting the ball well. Their ball movement is okay, but it could get better. So I think we should win this game. But UConn has a lot of talent, and who knows when Kevin Ollie will be able to figure it all out for them and get them headed in the right direction.
I'm just looking forward to us playing Rodney Purvis again, because when he was at NC State, the kid thought he was going to be all world. He thought he was going to be one and done. Instead, he was one and done at NC State because it didn't work out for him quite the way he'd hoped. And then he takes a year off to redshirt, and now he's at UConn. I have a feeling I know he's not lighting things up there yet. 7 points per game so far in 4 games. He's not setting the world on fire at UConn. I think rather than being one and done, he's going to end up being a kid who plays 4 or 5 years in college, and it may never work out for him, which is unfortunate. I mean, I know he really wanted it, but anyway, I'm looking forward to seeing him play because I remember him when he was at NC State. Of course, Ryan Boatwright is a joy to watch. I was looking at his stats. He's shooting a lot this year. I mean, he's putting the ball up a tremendous amount of the time. And he hits a decent percent. He's terrible from 3. He's only hitting 20% of his 3-pointer so far, which is last year he was way better from 3. If he gets hot, I mean, that may be their, sort of the thing they're going to hang their hat on in this game. I don't see them having much of a chance. But if Boatwright, gets hot from outside and Daniel Hamilton can shoot the ball, they may try and light us up from the perimeter. Good day for Rashid Suleiman, who's our best perimeter defender, to really lock someone down, I think. Yeah.
And it's also notable, Rodney Purvis follows he is the second in a 2-man line of NC State point guards or I guess guards who left and sat out for transfers while their transfer schools won national championships, as Ryan Harrow did the year before at Kentucky. So
that's right. That's true.
I don't think anybody has transferred from NC State since then, but apparently if you want to win a national championship, get transfers from state.
Yes, but you don't get to play for the national championship. You just get to watch it.
But you do get to win it and eventually get a ring. I think like after you graduate, you can get it, but you don't get one. Well, there's all kinds of silly rules.
Yes. Thank you, NCAA, for being so interesting and stupid with your rule book. Hey, we need to move on. We're going on forever here, but we want to get to something that we launched this week for all those folks on the Duke Basketball Report bulletin board who are our faithful listeners and know us well. Guys, we put out a question to all of you, and now we're going to get to some of our favorite answers to that question. Our question was, your favorite story, your most interesting encounter with another Duke person. The implication was sort of a Duke basketball person, but Sam, I think your favorite story that someone posted was not involving a Duke basketball person.
Yeah. So my story I picked from poster Tom B, who is a longtime poster. And I'll summarize his story. You should go to the forum and read it. It's very funny. But his story involves a famous, now deceased Duke person named Dr. Reynolds Price, who was a notable professor at Duke and who Tom B's roommate senior year was writing a thesis for. Dr. Price left a voicemail on their dorm room voice machine. I didn't realize that back in the day, the voice machine actually had a tape on it. I'm too young to remember that. But apparently, the voicemail machine used to have a tape on it, and when they record messages, they would take up spaces on the tape. So Dr. Price once went to leave a message on their voicemail, and he was the 9th in line. So after sitting through and waiting for the tape to move through all the 9 other sort of inane messages, Dr. Price left a message that Tom B says was like the voice of God himself emanating from our $10.99 piece of crap from Sears. That was an incredible waste of time. So that was the really good story from Tom B. Jason, did you have one to share?
I did. And by the way, I really like that story. I know Tom B a little bit off of the DBR. He and I have interacted in the past, and that's a great story. I'm glad he shared it. The one I liked the best was by someone a poster named Duke Devil, who's from Gaza. He was not a Native American when he came to Duke, and he talks about being on fall break in the year 1999, and he was one of the few kids still on campus. He hadn't gone home, probably not an easy thing to go home because it's such a long trip for him. And the only other people around were kids in the basketball team, including Jason Williams, and that he and Jay Will sort of got to be good friends and hung out together a lot over that fall break, and they would play pool and stuff like that, and that Jay Will was a ridiculously good pool player. But the funny part of the story, the part I really liked, was the first time Duke Devil met Jay Will, they were playing pickup soccer, and I guess being from Gaza, maybe he didn't know how important the basketball players were. So they're playing pickup soccer, and he slide tackled and knocked down Jay Will, and
Whoops.
everyone on the field like froze, like, oh my God. And he said that luckily there was no injury. Jay Will hopped up and was laughing and kept on playing hard. But I have visions, of the Chronicle putting a story out about how our star basketball player was injured in a pickup soccer game. We need to wrap those guys in bubble wrap and make sure they don't get hurt most of the time. But I found that story amusing. And there were lots of other great stories. Like Sam was saying, I encourage all of you listening to go to the DBR forum, the Duke Basketball Report forum, and listen to, or read, I should say, the stories that people have posted there about their favorite interactions with a Duke player. Ordinarily, this might be the time that Sam or I chime in with our own story. I will tell you that when I was at Duke in the late 1980s, I was friends with a lot of the guys in the team, and out of respect for for their reputations, I don't think I have a story that I can repeat in a public forum.
And we appreciate that.
By the way, I want to let everyone know about our topic for next week. For all of you folks on the forum, we want to give a Christmas gift to Duke, because next week will be our Christmas episode. So our Christmas gift to Duke will be, we want to fix the irrational hatred and resentment of Duke. We know it's out there. Everyone hates Duke. I mean, ESPN does stories on it all the time. So we're going to fix the irrational hatred of Duke. And our challenge to all of you on the DBR forum is, the first thing we must do to fix the irrational hatred of Duke is, and then you guys fill in whatever it is. We want to hear your ideas, your suggestions for what we should fix, what we should do to fix the fact that everyone hates Duke. I unfortunately think the answer is lose, which I'm not prepared to do. I think everyone hates us because we're really good and we always win.
and I'll make sure to post a separate topic on the forum so that folks can just answer that question and not have to try to find it in the general podcast discussion.
Yes, absolutely. Now, ordinarily at this time, we might be talking about our player of the week. That's something we do every week here on the DBR podcast. There were no games this week, so no player of the week. With that, we're pretty much done here. I want to again thank Sam Klein for joining me on the DBR podcast. Donald Wine.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I was going to thank Jason Evans for hosting and putting together the agenda for today, and especially for locking down our excellent guest.
Yes. I was going to say Donald Wine, who usually joins us on the DBR podcast, couldn't make it this week. He'll be with us again next week. I also want to thank, even though he's not here to hear it, I want to thank Dan Kane from the News and Observer for joining us. He was amazing and had some really interesting things to tell us about his investigation into the scandal at North Carolina. But that's about it for us now on the DBR podcast. We'll be back next week at this same time for myself, Jason Evans, for Sam Klein. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
And looking forward to next week. We've got another good guest coming on, so make sure to tune in.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm the one who landed Dan Kane. Sam has landed a wonderful guest for next week. We're really looking forward to that. We're not going to tell you who it is, but it will be equally interesting. Trust me. Equally interesting to Dan Kane. But anyway, for me, Jason Evans, for my co-host Sam Klein, for all of us who work behind the scenes to get the DBR podcast on the air, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week, and go Devils.
Let's go Duke.